She went in to clean and saw a crying baby, surrounded by torn-up legal documents. Hey there, welcome back to the channel. I'm so glad you're here. Today, we're diving into a crazy, unexpected story. Imagine this. A cleaning lady walks into a mansion, ready to do her job, but what she finds is something she could never have predicted: a crying baby surrounded by torn-up legal documents. What happened? Why was she left all alone? Well, stick around to find out. And just a heads up, this story is definitely not for the faint of heart. It's full of surprises, twists, and maybe a little bit of drama. Before we get started, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to Stories TH, and share your location and local time in the comments. Let's see where everyone's watching from today. All right, get comfy, take a deep breath, and let's jump into this wild ride together. You're in for a story you won't forget. The unexpected discovery. As I stepped into the grandiose mansion, the smell of polished wood and fresh linens filled the air. It was the kind of place that made you feel small, almost insignificant in its luxury. But today, there was an unsettling heaviness in the atmosphere. Something wasn't right. It was supposed to be just another day at work, another routine cleaning job for the rich and famous. But the moment I crossed the threshold, I felt it. Something was different. I wasn't supposed to be here today. Normally, Mrs. Montgomery, the lady of the house, was at home, overseeing everything with her usual air of elegant precision. But today, it was empty, no staff in sight, no one moving about. I should have been alarmed, but I wasn't. My mind was focused on the task at hand: tidy up, clean the counters, vacuum the floors, and move on. That's what I always did, always stayed in the background, never involved in anything that wasn't my job. I walked into the living room, the massive space that always made me feel like a child visiting a museum. The couches were draped in soft silks, and the floors gleamed with polish. But then, as I turned the corner, I froze. A sound broke through the usual silence. A soft, yet desperate cry. My heart skipped a beat as I followed the sound to the far corner of the room. There, nestled among a sea of shredded paper, lay a baby. A tiny, fragile thing, her face red from crying, her little hands clutching at the air as if reaching for something or someone. My mind raced. What was a baby doing here, alone? And what was all this mess? The papers scattered around her weren't just any papers. They were legal documents, torn into pieces, as though someone had violently shredded them in a fit of rage. I took a tentative step forward, not sure what to do. It wasn't like I was in the business of solving mysteries, especially not in the homes of millionaires. But this was no ordinary situation. I kneeled beside the baby, feeling her warm breath on my fingers as she sniffled between sobs. Her eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that almost felt like recognition. But why? I didn't know her. I'd never seen her before, yet something about her made my heart ache. I reached down to comfort her, instinctively brushing her tears away, but my mind was racing. The torn documents caught my eye again. They were filled with names, addresses, and a case number. A court case. This wasn't just a random pile of trash. Something serious was happening here. I glanced around, hoping someone would appear, maybe Mrs. Montgomery. But the house remained eerily silent. I felt the pressure building in my chest, a sense of responsibility that I hadn't signed up for. What if I did something wrong? What if this baby was in danger, and I was the only one who could help? As I tried to collect my thoughts, the door to the study creaked open behind me, and I spun around, startled. The figure that emerged from the shadows wasn't Mrs. Montgomery. It was a man, tall, dressed in a sharp suit that seemed out of place in such a chaotic moment. His face was familiar. I'd seen him in the papers before, on the covers of magazines and news outlets. This was Maxwell Stone, the CEO of Stone Enterprises, the man who built an empire from the ground up, the man whose name was synonymous with power, money, and influence. And now here he was, standing before me, his eyes scanning the room as if searching for something or someone. His gaze stopped on the baby, and I could see his expression flicker between confusion and something else, something darker. "Who are you?" I blurted out before I could stop myself. My heart pounded in my chest, adrenaline surging through me. He didn't answer right away. Instead, his eyes softened as they moved from the baby to the mess on the floor. For a moment, he seemed lost, like he wasn't sure where to begin. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice low but steady. "I didn't expect anyone to find out about this." I swallowed hard. "What is going on here? Why is she alone?" Maxwell took a deep breath and stepped closer, kneeling beside me. His presence was overwhelming, his aura one of control, even in this chaos. This isn't supposed to be happening," he muttered more to himself than to me. I looked at him, searching for answers. What isn't supposed to be happening? Who's the baby? Why are there court documents everywhere? He ran a hand through his hair, his gaze shifting to the torn papers. "She's mine," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The words hit me like a ton of bricks. Maxwell Stone had a child. And why was she here, alone, crying in the middle of his pristine mansion? "I never meant for any of this to happen," he continued, his voice shaking slightly now. "These papers, they're part of a legal battle I've been fighting, and she—" He paused, his eyes locking with mine. "She's caught in the middle of it all." The weight of his words settled over me, the confusion and tension building between us. There was so much more to this story, so much that I didn't understand, and for the first time, I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear it all. Maxwell Stone, the man who had everything, was now kneeling beside me in this quiet room, his heart in turmoil. His empire, his perfect world, was crumbling, and I was right in the middle of it. And just like that, my day, my life, was no longer just about cleaning. It was about uncovering a mystery that could change everything. The quiet cry of the baby echoed in the stillness of the room, a reminder that no one was truly untouchable, not even the richest, most powerful man in the world. It seemed like it was over, continued. Maxwell stood in front of me, looking almost vulnerable, his eyes soft but filled with a fierce determination. He was no longer the CEO who ruled his empire with an iron fist, but a man weighed down by the consequences of his own decisions. The shattered papers around us, the baby in my arms, and the silence in the room were a far cry from the corporate events, the glamorous dinners, and the high-profile meetings that I had imagined his life was made of. He looked at me for a long moment, as though deciding whether or not to let me in on the secret he'd been guarding. But finally he spoke, his voice steady, though a bit strained. "This isn't just a legal case. This is about everything I've worked for, my company, my reputation, my legacy. And now, it's all at risk. Because of her." I followed his gaze to the baby in my arms. The innocent face that had once been crying now looked up at him with curiosity, as if sensing the tension in the air. Maxwell's gaze softened again, and I couldn't help but notice the shift in him. Beneath the veneer of a powerful businessman, there was a father, a man who would do anything to protect what was his. But I could see the fear in his eyes too. Fear of losing her. Fear of losing everything. "You've got to understand," he continued, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "I didn't want any of this to happen. I didn't want her to be caught in the middle of a war that's bigger than all of us. Her mother, she was a part of my life, a part of my past. And now, everything is falling apart because of it." I could hear the regret in his voice. It was raw, unfiltered. And yet, I couldn't help but feel the weight of his words. How many men would be willing to show this side of themselves? The part of them that wasn't about business deals or stock prices or empire building? In this moment, Maxwell Stone wasn't the powerful CEO. He was a man who had lost control of the one thing that truly mattered to him. "What happened?" I asked, my voice quiet, trying not to disturb the fragile moment. "What is this all about?" Maxwell didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned away from me, pacing for a few moments, as though trying to collect his thoughts. The room felt colder now, the sunlight from the windows casting long shadows on the walls, as if the whole house was holding its breath. waiting for the truth to come out. "This," he finally said, turning back to me, "is about a custody battle, a legal battle over her." His eyes fell on the baby again, his expression now one of both sorrow and resolve. "Her mother and I were never married, but we shared something real. And when she died—" He paused, the words catching in his throat. "When she died, everything changed. I was left with nothing but a fight for her, a fight that's been going on for months, and now she's here, caught in the middle of it all." The weight of his words hit me like a tidal wave. He was fighting for custody of his own child, and in the process, he had become entangled in a mess of legal battles, media scrutiny, and a past he couldn't escape. "How did this all go so wrong?" I whispered, almost to myself, though I knew Maxwell could hear me. He looked at me, his expression pained. "You have to understand, this isn't just about me. This is about the people I'm up against. Powerful people who would stop at nothing to make sure she doesn't get to stay with me. They want to take her away, and I can't let that happen." I looked down at the baby in my arms, her soft breath warming my chest, her tiny hand gripping the edge of my sleeve. This little girl, caught in the middle of a battle she had no understanding of, seemed so small in the grand scheme of things. And yet, she held the power to tear apart everything Maxwell had built. "I won't let them take her away," Maxwell continued, his voice low but filled with conviction. "I will do whatever it takes to protect her, even if it means sacrificing everything." There was a sudden sharpness in his tone, a determination that was unmistakable. It was the same kind of resolve that had built his empire, but now it was focused on something far more personal. For the first time, I realized just how far he would go. He wasn't just the CEO of a company anymore. He was a father who would fight with everything he had to keep his child safe. But the reality of the situation started to sink in. If he was willing to sacrifice everything, what did that mean for me? I wasn't part of his world. I didn't belong in this fight. And yet somehow, I had become a part of it. "Maxwell," I began, my voice uncertain, "what do you need me to do?" He looked at me, his gaze sharp, but there was something more there. Something softer, a hint of vulnerability that I hadn't seen before. "I need you to help me keep her safe. I need you to help me navigate this mess. And most importantly, I need you to promise that you won't tell anyone about her. Not a soul. Not even your friends." His words were heavy with urgency, and for a moment I hesitated. I wasn't sure what I was getting myself into, but I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just some random cleaning job anymore. This was a fight for a little girl's future, and somehow I was caught in the middle of it. I didn't know if I was ready to step into his world, to dive into the chaos of his life. But as I looked at the baby, her wide eyes staring up at me with an innocence that broke my heart, I knew I couldn't walk away. Not now. "Okay," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil in my chest. "I promise." Maxwell's expression softened, and for the first time I saw something like gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, and in that moment I realized that my life would never be the same. I had just stepped into a world of wealth, power, and secrecy, a world where nothing was as it seemed, and every decision I made would change the course of not only my life, but the life of a little girl who had no say in any of it. I wasn't just cleaning anymore. I was in the middle of a story that would unfold in ways I could never have imagined. The hidden truth. Maxwell's eyes locked onto mine with an intensity I couldn't quite understand. There was a depth to his gaze that spoke volumes of regret, fear, and an almost desperate desire to protect his daughter. As I stood there holding the baby in my arms, I realized just how tangled his life was. This wasn't just about a custody battle. It was a war, one that had been brewing for months, maybe even years, and now I had unknowingly become a part of it. The weight of the situation pressed down on me, and for the first time, I could feel the full scope of the power that Maxwell Stone wielded not just in his company, but in his personal life. Everything he had built, everything he had worked for, was at risk. And it wasn't just his future hanging in the balance anymore. It was the future of this innocent little girl, his daughter. Maxwell ran a hand through his hair, pacing slowly as he gathered his thoughts. His frustration was palpable, but so was his fear. He was a man who had lived most of his life in control of his business, his empire, and every aspect of his life. But here, in this room, with a baby in my arms and legal papers scattered on the floor, he seemed powerless. I could see it in the way he moved, in the way his jaw tightened when he spoke. "I've spent my entire life building an empire," he said, his voice laced with bitterness. "And now, I'm watching it crumble because of one mistake, one woman, one decision that I thought would be my salvation, but it ended up being my downfall." I could see the regret in his eyes as he paused, taking a deep breath. Her name was Claire Holloway. She was the love of my life. And for a time, I thought we could build something together, something real. But I was wrong. She was never who I thought she was. I stood there, unsure of how to respond. I hadn't expected this. I hadn't expected Maxwell to open up about the woman in his past, the one who seemed to have left him broken, and now her legacy was threatening to ruin everything he had worked so hard for. "Claire and I met years ago," Maxwell continued, his voice low. "She was brilliant, beautiful, everything I could ever want. But she had her own secrets that I didn't know about until it was too late." The room felt colder as Maxwell's words hung in the air. I could tell he was fighting with something inside of him, something he wasn't quite ready to confront. The truth about the woman he had loved, the woman who had given him the one thing he could never replace, his daughter. "She wasn't just another woman in my life," he said, his eyes flashing with a mixture of pain and anger. "She had a past one that I didn't know about until I was too deep. She had ties to people who would do anything to keep us apart. And when I tried to take control, to protect her from it all, I made the mistake of thinking I could fix everything. I couldn't. And now, she's gone." I could see the way his shoulders slumped as he spoke, the weight of the words settling on him. His empire, his wealth, his power. It all seemed so insignificant now. All that mattered, at least in this moment, was his daughter. And the fear that gripped him was palpable. "Claire died a few months ago," he continued, his voice trembling slightly. "But before she died, she left me with one final thing. Her daughter, my daughter." He paused, looking down at the baby in my arms. "I never wanted to be a father. I didn't think I was ready. But now I have no choice. I have to be her father. I have to protect her." His words lingered in the air as I processed them. Maxwell Stone, a man who had everything, who had conquered the world of business and wealth, was now fighting for the most basic thing of all, the safety of his child. His entire life had been turned upside down in a matter of months, and now he was grasping for any shred of control he could find. "Why didn't you tell me any of this before?" I asked quietly. The question had been on my mind since he first opened up. "Why keep it all hidden?" Maxwell turned to face me, his eyes dark with a mixture of frustration and sorrow. "I didn't want to drag anyone into this mess. I thought I could handle it myself. But now I see that I can't. Not without help." There was a long silence between us, one filled with uncertainty. The weight of what he was asking me to do settled over me. He was asking for my trust. He was asking me to help him protect his daughter, a child who had been thrust into a world of chaos she didn't understand. "I didn't know what to do," Maxwell continued, his voice growing softer. "I'm not equipped for this. I've spent my life making deals, building companies, fighting for power. But nothing has prepared me for this. Nothing has prepared me for being a father." His vulnerability struck me deeply. This man, this towering figure of power, had been knocked down by something he hadn't expected, something more powerful than money or status. His love for his daughter had brought him to his knees, and he was looking to me for help. I looked down at the baby in my arms, her tiny fingers wrapped around my sleeve. She was so innocent, so fragile, and yet she held the key to everything. Her presence in this house, in Maxwell's life, had become the catalyst for everything that was happening. "Maxwell," I said, my voice steady now, "you're not alone in this. We'll figure it out. I don't know everything, but I can help you. I'll help you protect her." He looked at me, his eyes filled with gratitude and something else, something deeper. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. And just like that, I knew there was no turning back. I was no longer just a cleaning woman in a mansion full of luxury and wealth. I was a part of something much bigger, something far more dangerous. And as I looked at Maxwell Stone, I realized that this wasn't just his fight anymore. It was mine too. The ties that bind. As the days passed, I found myself slipping deeper into Maxwell's world, a world far removed from my own. The mansion, the wealth, the power, it was all so overwhelming. And yet, it wasn't the opulence that kept my thoughts occupied. It was the delicate balance between loyalty and danger, the invisible thread that tied me to Maxwell and his daughter. The house had taken on a new meaning for me. It wasn't just a place of polished floors and expensive artwork anymore. It was a battleground, a place where every decision, every move, mattered. Maxwell was right. He couldn't do this alone. And somehow, in the quiet moments between the chaos, I had become his unexpected ally. Maxwell, for all his strength and ambition, seemed like a man desperately grasping at something he couldn't control. He had built an empire, but now it felt like everything was slipping through his fingers. The power he once wielded with ease had no impact here. This was about love, loss, and the responsibility of raising a child. His daughter had become his everything, and I could see the transformation happening right before my eyes. The cold CEO I had once imagined was slowly being replaced by a father who would do anything to protect his child. I spent my days helping with the baby, trying to provide some semblance of normalcy in a life that had become anything but. The more time I spent with her, the more I felt a deep connection. She wasn't just Maxwell's daughter. She was becoming a part of me, too. One afternoon, Maxwell asked me to meet him in the study. He had been distant, his focus on the legal battle consuming every moment of his day. But today, there was something different in the air. He seemed almost defeated. I found him sitting behind his massive desk, papers spread out in front of him, his face etched with exhaustion. The harsh lines on his face were more pronounced, his shoulders slumped with the weight of everything he was carrying. He looked up as I entered, offering a small, tired smile. "Come in," he said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "We need to talk." I walked in, my heart pounding in my chest. I had no idea what he was about to say, but I knew it was important. The tension in the room was palpable, and I could feel the gravity of the situation pressing down on us both. "I've been thinking," Maxwell began, his eyes dark with thought. "I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending like I have everything under control. The custody battle, it's tearing me apart. And now there's more at stake than just my company. It's her future. It's her safety." I took a seat across from him, watching as his fingers traced the edge of a paper. It was clear he wasn't just talking about the legal fight anymore. He was talking about his daughter's life, about the world she would grow up in. "I never thought I'd be in this position," he continued, his voice barely a whisper. "I thought I could handle it all. I thought I could win at everything. But this..." He paused, looking up at me. "This isn't about winning. It's about doing what's right." The man who had once been a master of control, a force to be reckoned with, now seemed like a man on the brink of losing everything. I had never seen him so vulnerable. It was as if the foundation of his entire life was crumbling, and all he had left was a little girl who needed him more than anyone ever had. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do anymore," Maxwell confessed, his voice breaking slightly. "I'm out of options. The legal team is pushing me in one direction, but I can't keep going down that path. I won't do it. Not if it means losing her. I sat there in stunned silence, my mind racing. What was he saying? Was he willing to give up the fight? Was he going to walk away from everything, his wealth, his empire, for his daughter? I've been thinking about what matters most, he continued, and I realize that all the money in the world won't help her if I don't make the right choices now. She needs me, not as the CEO of a company, not as some rich businessman. She needs me to be her father. It was in that moment that I understood the depth of his struggle. Maxwell wasn't just fighting a legal battle, he was fighting for the very soul of his family. And he was torn. He wanted to be the man his daughter needed, but he was trapped in a world of corporate obligations and ruthless business decisions. Maxwell, I said softly, breaking the silence. What can I do? How can I help? His eyes met mine, a flicker of hope in them, as though he hadn't realized just how much he needed someone else until now. I can't do this alone, he said, his voice steadying. I need someone to help me see things clearly, someone to remind me of what's important. I knew then that I couldn't walk away. No matter how much I tried to convince myself that this wasn't my battle, the reality was different. This was about more than just Maxwell's empire or his past mistakes. This was about a child, a little girl who had no say in the world she was born into. I'll help you, Maxwell, I said, the words coming more easily than I had expected. I'll help you protect her. We'll figure this out together. Maxwell's face softened, a quiet gratitude in his eyes. Thank you, he said, his voice filled with sincerity. The room seemed to grow quieter, as though the weight of the decision had settled on both of us. It was a turning point, a moment where everything would change. The battle ahead wasn't just about winning or losing, it was about choosing what kind of life Maxwell and his daughter would have. As I left the study that day, the magnitude of what we were about to face hit me like a wave. This was no longer just about a custody fight. This was about everything about love, about loyalty, and about the ties that bound us together in a world that had the power to break us. And as I glanced back toward the study, I knew one thing for sure. Nothing would ever be the same. A path no one expected. As the days wore on, I found myself more deeply embedded in Maxwell's world than I had ever imagined. What started as a simple cleaning job had evolved into something much larger, much more complicated. There were moments when I thought about walking away, when the pressure felt too much, when I wondered if I was in over my head. But each time I looked at the little girl in my arms, and I knew I couldn't leave. Not now. Not after everything Maxwell had confided in me. Maxwell, too, had changed in ways I hadn't expected. The man I had initially seen as a powerful, untouchable figure had slowly revealed his vulnerabilities, his fears, and his struggles. It wasn't just the battle for custody that weighed on him anymore, it was the future of his daughter, a future that seemed more fragile with each passing day. He was trying to change, to become the father his daughter needed. But the truth was, the world he had built didn't leave much room for mistakes. Every move had to be calculated, every decision weighed against the risk of losing everything he held dear. The business empire, the wealth, the connections, it all seemed irrelevant now. What mattered most was his daughter's safety, her well-being, and the future he could give her. But even with his newfound resolve, Maxwell wasn't invincible. The battle wasn't just legal, it was personal too. There were people out there, dangerous people, who would stop at nothing to ensure that Maxwell lost. To them, this wasn't about a father fighting for his child. It was about power, control, and the threats that lurked beneath the surface of every business deal. I saw it in Maxwell's eyes when he looked at me, sometimes this unspoken understanding that we were in this together, whether we liked it or not. He didn't just need me to help with the legal battles. He needed me to be there, to stand by him as the world he knew crumbled around him. But as much as I had become a part of his life, there was still so much I didn't understand. There were secrets, things left unsaid, buried under layers of corporate strategy and personal loss. And with each new revelation, I found myself questioning what kind of man Maxwell really was. Was he just a businessman, driven by his need for power? Or was he someone who could truly change, someone capable of putting everything on the line for his daughter? That question lingered in my mind as I stood in the living room one evening, holding the baby while Maxwell paced in front of the fireplace. The flames flickered in the dim light, casting long shadows on the walls. The weight of the silence between us was heavy, but I didn't know what to say. Everything felt so uncertain. The future seemed so out of our hands. Maxwell stopped pacing and turned to me. There was a look in his eyes, something I hadn't seen before. It was a mixture of resolve and desperation, as though he had reached a point where there was no turning back. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice low, "about what's at stake here. And it's not just about the custody battle anymore. It's about everything. My past, my future. Everything I've done has led me to this moment, and I'm not sure I'm ready for what happens next." I watched him carefully, trying to read the emotions behind his words. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice soft but filled with curiosity. "I mean that this isn't just a legal battle for me anymore," he said, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "It's a battle for my soul, for who I am, for who I want to be. I've spent my whole life building this empire, and I thought I could handle everything. But now I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I've lost sight of the person I was, the person I used to be before all of this." He paused, his gaze drifting toward the baby in my arms. "And I'm scared, you know? Scared that I've already lost her, scared that I'm too far gone to make it right." The vulnerability in his voice caught me off guard. This was the same man who had stood in front of boardrooms, who had commanded rooms with his presence. Now, he sounded like a man who was about to lose everything he held dear. I walked toward him, taking a deep breath before speaking. "Maxwell, you're not alone in this. You have her, your daughter, and you have me. I know it's hard, but you can't carry this weight by yourself. I'm here, and I'll help you through it." He looked at me, his expression softening for the first time in what felt like forever. "You don't know what you're getting into," he said, his voice hoarse. "Maybe not," I replied, my eyes meeting his. "But I know this. You're not the only one who's ever been lost. And I believe in you, Maxwell. I believe you can change, and I believe you can be the father she deserves." His eyes searched mine for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether to trust me completely. Finally, he let out a long breath, as if releasing the tension that had built up inside him for so long. "Thank you," he whispered. "I don't know what I'd do without you." In that moment, I knew that there was no turning back. The path ahead wasn't going to be easy. There would be more battles to fight, more secrets to uncover, and more challenges to face. But for the first time, I felt like we had a chance. Not just for Maxwell and his daughter, but for me too. The ties that bound us together were stronger than I had realized. And now, as I stood by Maxwell's side, I understood that I wasn't just helping him fight for his daughter's future. I was fighting for my own, too, for the life I never expected, for the love that was beginning to bloom in the most unexpected of places. I just hoped that, in the end, love would be enough. A moment of truth. The following days were a blur of meetings, legal briefings, and late-night discussions. Maxwell and I had become a team, something I hadn't anticipated when I first walked into his world. The initial tension had softened, replaced by an unspoken understanding that neither of us could carry this burden alone. Maxwell's drive to protect his daughter grew stronger with each passing day, but it was clear that the road ahead was far from smooth. Every step forward seemed to be met with another setback, another obstacle that threatened to tear apart everything he had worked for. There were moments when I saw the old CEO in him, that ruthless, calculated man who didn't take no for an answer. But then, there were moments like the ones when he looked at his daughter, that I saw something else entirely. A man who had realized that the things he valued most in life were not the assets in his portfolio, but the family he had always taken for granted. As the pressure mounted, Maxwell found himself caught in the crossfire of not just a legal battle, but a personal one. People from his past, people who had once been allies, now turned against him. There were whispers behind closed doors, anonymous threats, and a growing sense of unease that rippled through the walls of his mansion. The fight for custody had become more than just a courtroom drama. It was a war on multiple fronts, a fight for control over his life, his reputation, and his daughter's future. One evening, after another long day of strategizing and planning, I found myself sitting alone in the living room, cradling Maxwell's daughter as she drifted off to sleep in my arms. The quiet of the house was a stark contrast to the storm raging outside. The tension in the air seemed to hang heavy, a reminder that no matter how much we wanted peace, it was slipping further from our grasp. I heard the familiar sound of Maxwell's footsteps before he appeared in the doorway, his face weary but determined. He had a drink in his hand, a glass of whiskey that he took a slow sip from as he leaned against the doorframe, observing me. "How's she doing?" he asked, his voice soft as he watched his daughter sleep. I looked up, offering him a small smile. "She's fine. She's finally settled down." My gaze shifted back to the little girl, her peaceful face a contrast to the chaos that swirled around us. "She's a fighter, just like you." Maxwell chuckled, but it was a bitter sound. "I don't know if I'm a fighter anymore," he said, his tone laced with frustration. "I'm starting to wonder if I've been fighting the wrong battles my whole life." I stood up, careful not to disturb the baby, and walked toward him. "What do you mean?" He paused for a moment, then set the glass down on the table. The tension in his posture was palpable as he ran a hand through his hair, his mind clearly elsewhere. "I've spent my whole life trying to build something that no one could take away from me," he began, his voice low. "I've made deals, fought tooth and nail, taken risks, and pushed people out of my way to get to where I am. But I've never asked myself if any of it really matters. I've built this empire, but for what? So I can be the king of an empty castle?" His words struck me deeply. For so long, I had seen Maxwell as the man who had it all, the power, the wealth, the status. But now, standing before me, he seemed like a man who had lost sight of the very things that had driven him in the first place. "And now," he continued, his voice faltering slightly, "I'm realizing that the things I thought I could control, my business, my reputation, are all meaningless if I lose her." The vulnerability in his voice was undeniable. For a moment, I saw the man behind the empire, the man who had struggled with the same questions, the same fears that anyone might face. He was no longer the unshakable CEO. He was a father, a man torn between the past he had built and the future he hoped to give his daughter. I stepped closer to him, placing a hand on his arm. "You're not alone in this, Maxwell. You don't have to fight it alone anymore." He met my gaze, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and doubt. "I don't know if I can make this right. I've made so many mistakes." I shook my head gently. "We all make mistakes. What matters now is what you do with the chance you have left. You're doing everything you can to protect her. That's what counts." Maxwell looked down at the floor, a deep sigh escaping his lips. "I thought I could fix everything. I thought if I just played by the rules, if I just kept moving forward, I could win. But this isn't a game, is it?" He paused, then looked up at me, his expression raw. "I don't know how to be a father. I don't know how to make this right. I just want to make sure she's safe." In that moment, I saw the depth of his struggle. He wasn't just fighting for a legal victory. He was fighting for redemption, for the chance to be the father his daughter deserved. And in that fight, I realized that I wasn't just an observer anymore. I was part of this, whether I wanted to be or not. "You're already doing it," I said softly. "You're fighting for her. That's all that matters. You're not the same man you were before, Maxwell. You're changing. You're becoming the father she needs. And that's enough." Maxwell took a deep breath, the weight of my words sinking in. For the first time in a long while, he seemed to find some peace. The battle was far from over, but in that quiet moment, I realized something important. This wasn't just a fight for custody. It was a fight for a new beginning for both of us. And maybe, just maybe, it was a fight we could win together. The calm before the storm. The days that followed were a strange mixture of tension and unexpected moments of quiet clarity. Maxwell and I had settled into a routine, one that was far from normal, but felt more grounded than anything I had experienced in a long time. I spent my days caring for his daughter, comforting her in those rare moments when she cried, and filling the silence of the mansion with something resembling peace. Maxwell, for his part, was becoming more involved with his daughter's care. He had taken on the role of father in a way I hadn't thought possible for someone who had spent most of his life building an empire. But no matter how many tender moments we shared, the reality of what we were up against loomed over us like a shadow. The legal battle was intensifying. The people Maxwell had once trusted were turning on him, using every piece of information against him to gain control of his daughter's future. Every day felt like a countdown to the inevitable showdown. It wasn't just the threat of losing his daughter that weighed heavily on Maxwell. It was the realization that his entire life, everything he had worked for, was being questioned. The world he had carefully crafted was no longer secure. His relationships, his career, everything seemed to be slipping through his fingers. In those quiet moments when he thought no one was watching, I saw the man he had once been, a man who had it all and knew it, confident in his ability to conquer whatever came his way. But now the fear was real. It wasn't the fear of losing money or status, it was the fear of losing something more irreplaceable. The truth about his past, the secrets he had buried, the mistakes he had made had come rushing to the surface, and there was no escaping them. Every conversation seemed to revolve around the battle he was fighting. Yet there were moments when I could still see the flicker of hope in his eyes when he looked at his daughter. The hope that somehow, through all the chaos, he could give her a better life than the one he had built for himself. One afternoon, as Maxwell and I sat in his study discussing strategy, there was a knock on the door. I hadn't expected anyone, certainly not today. Maxwell looked at me, his expression a mixture of curiosity and wariness, before motioning for me to stay seated. He opened the door, and a familiar figure stepped inside. My heart skipped a beat. It was Charles Grayson, Maxwell's longtime business partner, and someone I had never liked. There was always something about him, his smile, his charm, that didn't sit right with me. And from the way Maxwell's face tightened at the sight of him, I could tell he felt the same. "Maxwell," Charles said smoothly, his voice dripping with insincerity. "I thought I'd drop by. I know things are a bit complicated right now, but we need to talk." Maxwell stood up, his hands clenched at his sides, but he forced a calm expression onto his face. "What do you want, Charles?" The words were polite, but they held an edge. I could feel the tension building in the room. Charles looked over at me, his gaze briefly lingering on me with a smirk. "Ah, I see you've found a little help. How nice." His tone was condescending, but Maxwell didn't react to the insult, keeping his focus on him. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Charles continued, sitting down without waiting for an invitation. "I'm here to offer you a solution." "A solution?" Maxwell's voice was icy, and I could sense the suspicion in his every word. "What kind of solution?" Charles smiled, that arrogant, self-assured grin that I had come to despise. "I've been hearing things, Maxwell. Things that suggest you're struggling. I thought it might be time for you to consider your options. A partnership, a way to make everything disappear." Maxwell's expression darkened, and I could see his jaw tighten. "I'm not interested in any more partnerships, Charles." "Oh, come on, Maxwell," Charles said, leaning forward. "You don't have a choice anymore. You're on the verge of losing everything, and I'm offering you a way out. You give me control of your company, and I'll make sure this custody battle goes away. I'll ensure your daughter is safe. You won't have to worry about the legal mess, the media pressure. Nothing. I'll take care of it all." The words hung in the air like a threat. My heart raced as I watched Maxwell's face turn pale. I had no doubt that Charles was trying to manipulate him, using his fears and his desperation against him. Maxwell stood up, pushing his chair back with a force that startled me. "You're crossing the line, Charles. I would never give you control of my company. Not for anything. Not even for my daughter." Charles shrugged, a look of mock sympathy crossing his face. You don't have a choice, Maxwell. You're not the same man you were. The people you trust, the people who used to work for you, they're all turning their backs. You need someone who can handle this mess, and I'm the only one who can. Maxwell's fists clenched, but he didn't speak. His silence was enough to tell Charles that he wasn't getting what he wanted. The tension in the room was thick, and I could feel the weight of Charles's words pressing in on us both. The threat was clear. Charles wasn't offering help, he was offering a power grab, using Maxwell's vulnerability as leverage. I stepped forward, my voice steady but firm. Get out, Charles. Maxwell doesn't need you. He doesn't need anyone like you. For a moment, there was a flash of surprise in Charles's eyes, but he quickly masked it with a sneer. Fine, he said, standing up, but don't say I didn't warn you. He walked out of the study, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. I could feel the weight of the decision Maxwell had just faced. Charles's offer was a tempting one, but it came at the cost of everything Maxwell had ever believed in. Maxwell stood there for a long time, his back to me, staring out of the window as if searching for something. I knew this wasn't over. The battle was far from finished, and the stakes had just gotten higher. But in that moment, I realized something important. Maxwell was no longer the man who would sacrifice everything for power. He was fighting for something real now, and I was fighting with him. Unraveling the ties. After Charles's visit, the house seemed quieter, heavier, as though the walls were holding their breath. Maxwell had retreated into himself, the weight of the offer and the threat lingering over him. I could see the toll it was taking, the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers tapped against the armrest of the chair as if trying to stave off the overwhelming feeling of helplessness. I spent the next few days trying to maintain a sense of normalcy, looking after his daughter and keeping the house in order. But it was impossible to ignore the tension that still hung in the air. Maxwell seemed lost in thought more often than not, retreating into his study or pacing the mansion late at night. His mind was consumed by the battle ahead, by the possibility that Charles might be right. Could he really lose everything? Could he be forced to give up his company, his life's work, just to keep his daughter? I saw glimpses of the old Maxwell, sharp, decisive, unyielding, but they were fleeting. More often than not, he appeared like a man torn between two worlds. One world was filled with the corporate battles, the high stakes, and the success that had defined his life for so long. The other was new, uncertain, a world of fatherhood, vulnerability, and a deep desire to protect his daughter at all costs. I sat in the study one afternoon, looking over some papers when Maxwell entered, his steps measured, slower than usual. He looked exhausted, the weariness of the past few days etched into his face. He didn't say anything right away, but instead walked toward the window, staring out at the sprawling grounds as if searching for some clarity. "You're still thinking about it, aren't you?" I asked quietly, my eyes never leaving the papers on the desk in front of me. He sighed deeply, his shoulders slumping. "I don't know what to do anymore. Charles is right about one thing: we're running out of time. The court date is fast approaching, and the pressure is mounting. I'm not sure I can keep up this fight and protect her at the same time. It's too much." The raw emotion in his voice hit me harder than I expected. Maxwell Stone, the man who had conquered an empire, the man who had always been in control, was now admitting that he didn't know if he could win this battle, that he wasn't sure he could protect the one thing that mattered most. I stood up, walking over to him, my voice steady despite the rising uncertainty in my chest. "Maxwell, you don't have to do this alone. I'm here. We're in this together. And I know you're scared, but you're not backing down. Not now. Not after everything." His gaze shifted from the window to me, his eyes searching, as if he was trying to read something I wasn't saying. There was a flicker of something in his expression, a mixture of gratitude and a deep, unspoken fear. "I never wanted this for her," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I never wanted her to be caught in this mess. But the more I try to protect her, the more I feel like I'm losing control of everything else. I'm afraid that no matter what I do, I'm going to fail her." I reached out, placing a hand gently on his arm. You're not failing her, Maxwell. You're doing everything you can. You're showing up for her in a way that many people wouldn't. That's what matters. And we'll fight this together. You're not alone. He exhaled slowly, his gaze softening as he looked at me. You really think so? I know so, I said firmly. You've already proven you're willing to do whatever it takes. That's more than most people ever give. Maxwell stood in silence for a moment before nodding, almost imperceptibly. I could see the weight of the decision ahead pressing on him, but there was something different in his expression now. It wasn't just the fear of failure anymore. There was determination, a quiet resolve that hadn't been there before. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know how I can ever repay you for this. You've given me a second chance to be the father she needs, and I won't waste it. I squeezed his arm gently, trying to convey all the support and strength I felt for him without saying a word. There was still so much left to fight for, so many uncertainties ahead. But in that moment, I felt something shift between us. It wasn't just about the custody battle anymore. It was about trust, about finding strength in each other when everything else seemed to be falling apart. As we stood there, the silence stretched between us. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like the calm before the storm, the quiet that came before the final confrontation. Maxwell had made his choice. He was no longer willing to back down, and I knew that together we would face whatever came next. The sound of a phone ringing broke the silence, and Maxwell's expression immediately hardened. He stepped back from me, grabbing his phone from the desk. The brief look of panic that flashed across his face told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't over. The storm was still on its way. He answered the call, his voice low and controlled, but I could hear the strain in his tone. Yes, he said, pausing to listen. I understand. We'll be ready. As he ended the call, he turned back to me, his face set in a grim expression. It's time. The hearing's tomorrow. I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. Tomorrow would be the day. Everything we had fought for, everything we had worked toward, would culminate in that moment. There was no more time for second guessing. The storm was coming, but this time, I knew we would face it together. The final decision. The night before the hearing, the mansion felt colder than it ever had before. It wasn't the temperature that made it feel that way. It was the weight of everything hanging in the air. Tomorrow would be the culmination of everything Maxwell and I had fought for. It wasn't just about a courtroom victory. It was about his daughter's future. It was about his future. And despite everything that had happened so far, it felt like the hardest decision of his life was still ahead of him. I walked into the living room where Maxwell stood by the large window, his hands resting on the sill as he gazed out into the darkness. The city lights flickered far below, their glow a stark contrast to the shadows that seemed to surround us in this house. I could see the deep furrows in his brow, the way he was lost in his thoughts. The man who had spent years conquering boardrooms and markets now seemed like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure of which way to turn. You okay? I asked softly, stepping into the room and standing beside him. Maxwell didn't answer immediately. He stared out at the world below for a long moment before turning to face me, his expression unreadable. There was a vulnerability in his eyes that I hadn't seen before, a vulnerability I couldn't have imagined existed in the man who built an empire with sheer willpower. I'm terrified, he confessed, his voice quiet, almost too quiet. Tomorrow could change everything. I could lose her. I could lose everything. I stepped closer to him, placing a hand gently on his arm. Maxwell, no matter what happens tomorrow, you're not alone. You've already proven more than enough. You've fought for her. You've shown up and you're doing everything you can. She'll see that. She will know. His eyes met mine, searching, as if trying to find the courage I knew he was struggling to muster. I never thought I would get here, that I would be the one asking for help, needing someone else to help me fight for her. I spent so long thinking I could do it all myself. I was wrong. You're not the only one who's ever felt that way, I said gently, offering him a small, reassuring smile. But you've changed. You've become a father in a way I don't think you ever thought possible. That's something not even the court can take away. Maxwell was silent for a moment, and then he nodded, his face softening. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, he said, but I know this. I'm not going down without a fight, not for her, not for the life I want to give her. The quiet resolve in his voice filled the room with an energy I hadn't felt in a long time. The fear was still there, lurking behind his words, but it was tempered by something stronger now, a determination, a drive to do what was right. And I knew, in that moment, that no matter what happened in the hearing the next day, Maxwell had already proven something that would stay with him for the rest of his life, that he would never give up on his daughter. Whatever happens, I'm proud of you, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You've come so far, Maxwell, and that's all anyone can ask of you. He gave me a small, tight smile, the kind of smile that spoke volumes of the gratitude he could never fully express. I don't know if I'll ever be able to repay you for what you've done, for believing in me, for believing in us. I shook my head, my hand still resting on his arm. You don't need to repay me. This is something I'm doing because I believe in you, Maxwell, because I believe in the kind of father you're becoming, the kind of man you're becoming. For a brief moment, we stood there in silence, the weight of everything that had happened and everything still to come, hanging in the air between us. I could feel the intensity of the moment, the closeness we had forged in these trying times, and I knew we were standing at the edge of something new. The future, no matter how uncertain, was ours to shape. Maxwell broke the silence, his voice quieter now, but filled with a quiet strength. Tomorrow is going to be hard, but whatever happens, I'm ready. I can't change the past, but I can fight for what's right now, for her, for us. I nodded, feeling a sense of calm settle over me. You don't need to do it alone. I'm with you. The room was still silent, but it wasn't oppressive. It was peaceful, almost comforting. I could sense the tension leaving Maxwell's shoulders, the fear, though still present, softened by the realization that he had made the right choice. The road ahead would be difficult, there was no question about that, but he was no longer facing it alone. We stood there for a long while, neither of us saying anything, just taking in the quiet of the room, the understanding that we had each other. In the stillness, I realized something important. Tomorrow wasn't just about the court battle. It wasn't just about the decision Maxwell would make. It was about the new path we were forging together. The road was uncertain, but it was ours to walk. Maxwell turned back toward the window, his face resolute. We'll make it through this, he said softly, one way or another. And with that, I knew we would. Because no matter what the future held, we were no longer just fighting for a child's future. We were fighting for each other. The hearing. The next morning arrived too soon, the sun barely breaking over the horizon as if reluctant to cast its light on the looming confrontation. Maxwell's mansion, typically a place of luxury and calm, now felt like a battleground. The air inside was thick with anticipation, every room echoing with the weight of what was to come. We had all been preparing for this moment, some with hope, others with doubt, but now, it was here. The hearing was just hours away, and there was no turning back. I found Maxwell in the kitchen, his hands clasped tightly around a cup of coffee, his gaze distant as he stared out the window. The night had passed, but the heaviness of the situation hadn't lifted. I could see the lines of exhaustion beneath his eyes, but there was something different in his demeanor. The fear had transformed into something else, something more grounded. He was ready. You okay? I asked, stepping into the room, my voice soft but steady. He turned, his expression weary but determined. I've been asking myself that question all morning, he said, managing a small, tired smile. But, yeah, I'm okay. I have to be. I walked over to him, standing beside him for a moment before placing a hand on his arm. You've done everything you can. You've fought hard, Maxwell. Tomorrow, today, it's just the next step. He nodded, though his gaze didn't waver. His eyes were still clouded with the weight of uncertainty, but I could see the fire behind them now. He wasn't going to let anyone take away what he had worked for. What he had come to realize mattered most. Are you ready? I asked quietly, the question lingering in the air between us. Maxwell exhaled slowly, the weight of the question hanging heavy on his shoulders. I have to be. For her. This isn't just about winning or losing anymore. This is about making sure she knows I fought for her. That I'll always fight for her. I didn't need to say anything more. His words said it all. The battle had stopped being about his wealth or his business. It was about his daughter's future. And that was something no one could take from him. The car ride to the courthouse was quiet, each of us lost in our thoughts. Maxwell sat in the back, his posture rigid as he stared out the window, his face unreadable. I had seen him face down high-stakes business deals, rival CEOs, and a media storm. But this was different. He wasn't just up against his competitors anymore. He was facing the very thing that mattered most, his family. When we arrived at the courthouse, a sense of dread washed over me. The building loomed before us, stark and imposing, like a symbol of the battle that awaited inside. Maxwell stepped out of the car, his face set in stone, but there was something else there, something that spoke of years of pressure finally boiling over. He wasn't just walking into a courtroom today. He was walking into the unknown, where the outcome would define everything he had come to value. Inside the courthouse, everything moved with a sterile efficiency. The buzz of attorneys, staff, and media echoed in the halls, but it all seemed distant to me. My focus was on Maxwell, the man who had spent so much of his life controlling everything around him. But now, standing in this sterile, intimidating space, I could see the cracks. The facade of the powerful CEO had been replaced by the vulnerability of a father who was about to face the most important challenge of his life. I stood beside him as we entered the courtroom, the heavy wooden doors closing behind us with a finality that echoed through the room. The judge's bench loomed at the front, and the opposing side, Charles Grayson's legal team, sat on the other side, their eyes sharp and calculating. It was as if they could already see their victory, waiting for Maxwell to falter. As Maxwell took his seat at the plaintiff's table, I could feel the tension in the air. It wasn't just the legal arguments, the strategies, or the witnesses. It was the lives at stake, the future of a little girl who had already been through so much. And as I looked at Maxwell, I realized that it wasn't just the law that would decide this case. It was the heart, the unspoken truth that no lawyer could ever argue. The proceedings began with formalities, the judge addressing both sides, and the lawyers outlining their arguments. I watched Maxwell closely, his face calm, but his hands betraying his nerves. He gripped the armrests, his knuckles white, as he listened to the other side's claims. Charles' lawyer was smooth, well-practiced in the art of persuasion, but Maxwell's focus never wavered. He wasn't going to let anything distract him. He wasn't going to let anything take his daughter from him. The first few hours passed in a blur of legal jargon and paperwork, but when it was Maxwell's turn to speak, I could feel the entire room shift. This wasn't a man giving a rehearsed statement. This wasn't a CEO delivering a well-crafted pitch. This was a father standing up for his child, speaking from the heart, and for the first time, I saw the man I knew so well let down the walls he had built around himself. "Your Honor," Maxwell began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've spent my life building an empire. I've been successful, yes, but I've also made mistakes. But there's one thing I know for certain. My daughter is my world. She deserves a chance at a future where she feels loved and safe. She deserves to grow up knowing that I fought for her, and I'll do whatever it takes to give her that future." The room fell silent as his words hung in the air. There was no bravado, no sales pitch, just the raw truth of a father's love. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. This wasn't just a courtroom battle. It was the final test of everything Maxwell had become. The decision he was facing wasn't just about custody. It was about redemption, about his chance to rewrite the story of his life. And with that, I knew that no matter what the judge decided, Maxwell had already won something far more important. His daughter would know the truth. She would know that her father had fought for her with everything he had. The storm was almost over. The verdict. The rest of the hearing passed in a blur of testimony, legal arguments, and the unrelenting pressure of what was to come. Maxwell sat in his seat, his back straight, his gaze unwavering as he listened to each side present their case. His hands, though calm on the table in front of him, were clenched tight, his knuckles white, as if holding on to something he couldn't let go of. I could feel the tension in the air, heavy and suffocating. Every word, every motion felt like it could be the one that determined his daughter's fate. The other side had made their points, spinning a narrative that painted Maxwell as a man too caught up in his business, too detached from the real needs of a child. They painted him as a man who had lost sight of what mattered most. But when Maxwell spoke, when he shared his story, his heart, everything changed. It wasn't a story of power or empire. It was a story of a father who had finally realized what mattered most. It was the story of a man who, despite all his mistakes, had found something worth fighting for. And fight he did. With every ounce of determination, he made it clear that his daughter's well-being was his top priority. He wasn't a businessman in that moment. He was a father willing to sacrifice everything to keep her safe, to give her a future that was full of love and possibility. The sincerity in his voice, the emotion that broke through the stoic facade he had carefully built, left no doubt in anyone's mind that his daughter was the center of his universe. But now, we waited. The courtroom was eerily quiet. The judge, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, had listened carefully to both sides. He hadn't shown any signs of leaning one way or another, but we all knew that the decision would be monumental. The fate of Maxwell's daughter, and possibly Maxwell himself, lay in the hands of a man who would decide based on the law, but also on what he believed was the best interest of the child. Maxwell's eyes were fixed on the judge, his expression unreadable. The air felt thick with uncertainty. The waiting was unbearable, each second stretching into an eternity. I could see the toll it was taking on him, the quiet anxiety that was eating away at his resolve. He had always been in control of his destiny, always one step ahead of everyone else. But here, in this moment, control had slipped away from him. This wasn't about business. This was about love, sacrifice, and the fear of failure. As the judge prepared to deliver his verdict, Maxwell leaned forward slightly, his eyes focused, but there was something in his posture that made me realize how fragile this all was. It wasn't just about winning. It wasn't just about the case. It was about what Maxwell had become, a man who had never thought he could be vulnerable, but who had, time and time again, put his daughter first. And in doing so, he had proven something to himself, something that no legal decision could take away, that he was capable of change, capable of putting others before his own ambition. The judge cleared his throat, and the room seemed to hold its breath. "I have reviewed the evidence," the judge said, his voice firm but not unkind. "I have listened to both sides, and while this case has been complicated, I must say that it has also revealed a lot about the parties involved." Maxwell sat still, his jaw clenched, his eyes not leaving the judge. "I believe that the best interest of the child is not always determined by the wealth or status of the parents," the judge continued. "It is determined by their ability to provide love, stability, and a safe environment for the child to grow up in. In this case, while the mother's intentions may have been questioned, the father has shown a willingness to do whatever it takes to ensure his daughter's future. He has made it clear that his daughter's needs come before all else. I held my breath as the judge paused, his eyes briefly flicking to the opposing side before turning back to Maxwell. Therefore, he continued, his voice growing firmer, I am ruling in favor of the father. Full custody will be awarded to Maxwell Stone, with visitation rights granted to the maternal side of the family under the terms outlined in this agreement. A wave of relief rushed through me, but it was quickly followed by the realization that this was only the beginning. Maxwell had won, but the road ahead was still fraught with challenges. The court had decided in his favor, but that didn't mean it would be easy. The fight for his daughter's future wasn't over. The scars left by the battle would linger, but now Maxwell had the chance to truly be the father he had always wanted to be. And for his daughter, that was the most important thing of all. Maxwell's face softened for the first time in what felt like forever. He turned to me, his eyes filled with gratitude, relief, and something else. Something that spoke of the bond we had built through this entire ordeal. He didn't need to say anything. His gaze spoke volumes. We had done it. Together, we had fought for her, and we had won. As we left the courthouse, the weight of the decision finally seemed to lift from Maxwell's shoulders. The hard part wasn't over, but for the first time in months, there was a sense of peace between us. Maxwell was no longer the man consumed by his empire. He was the father who had reclaimed what mattered most. And for me, that was all that mattered now. A new beginning. The days after the verdict passed quickly, and yet slowly, like the ticking of a clock that had somehow gained a new rhythm. The courtroom battle was over, but the fight was far from finished. Maxwell had won the custody battle, but his life, and the life of his daughter, was about to change in ways that were both unexpected and necessary. The real work was just beginning. Maxwell's transformation was not immediate. There was no grand moment where he suddenly became the perfect father, the one who knew exactly what to do at every turn. But there was something different in him now, a softness, a patience, a willingness to embrace the messiness of parenthood that he had never considered before. It wasn't easy, and there were days when his old fears crept back in, the ones that whispered that he wasn't enough. But with each passing day, he proved to himself that he was. I saw it in the way he held his daughter now, in the way he spoke to her. There was tenderness in his voice, a gentleness that I hadn't expected from the man who had once commanded boardrooms and controlled empires. It was as if he had found something worth fighting for that had nothing to do with power or success. It was about love. It was about being present. And I was there too, every step of the way. At first, I thought I was simply a bystander in Maxwell's journey, a helper in his fight for his daughter. But over time, I realized that I was part of the story in ways I hadn't anticipated. We had built something together, something unexpected, something that had started out of necessity and grown into something deeper. One evening, after a long day of settling into their new routine, I sat with Maxwell on the terrace overlooking the city. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over everything. Maxwell sat beside me, the silence between us comfortable, no longer heavy with unspoken tension. "I don't think I could have done this without you," he said, his voice soft, almost uncertain. "When I first asked for your help, I had no idea how much I needed it." I looked over at him, surprised at the rawness in his voice. Maxwell was a man of few words, especially when it came to emotions, but there was an honesty in his tone that made me pause. "You don't need to thank me," I said, shrugging slightly. "I'm here because I believe in you, in the person you've become." Maxwell smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. It was different than the guarded smiles he used to give, the ones that were calculated, controlled. This one was genuine, unguarded, and it made something shift inside me, something that had been quietly growing over the past months. "I'm not sure I've ever been this person before," he admitted, looking out at the horizon. "I spent so much of my life building walls around me, walls to keep people out, walls to protect myself from feeling anything too deeply. But now, with her, With everything we've gone through, I'm starting to realize that those walls aren't what I need. I need to be open. I need to be present. For her. For you. His words caught me off guard. I had always known that Maxwell was a man of depth, someone capable of great change, but hearing him speak like this, the vulnerability, the openness, it made everything feel more real, more significant. This wasn't just about the custody battle anymore. It was about a man who had learned that love wasn't a weakness, it was a strength. "I think you're already doing it," I said quietly, my voice steady but filled with something unspoken between us. "You're already being the father she needs." Maxwell turned to me then, his expression serious, but there was something else there, something I couldn't quite place. "I don't know where this journey will take me," he said, his voice low, almost tentative. "But I want you to be a part of it. I want you to be part of this family, part of the future I'm trying to build." The weight of his words hit me like a wave. I had never imagined that what started as a simple helping hand would evolve into something deeper, something more meaningful. But now, as I looked at Maxwell, I understood. This wasn't just about the past or the fight for his daughter. It was about creating something new, together. And that scared me in ways I didn't fully understand, but it also excited me. "I'm already part of it," I said softly, meeting his gaze. "I always have been." There was a long silence after that, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence that spoke of understanding, of mutual respect, and of a future that was yet to be written. The weight of everything that had happened hung in the air, but it wasn't a burden anymore. It was a foundation, something we could build on together. Maxwell stood up then, offering me his hand. "Let's start the next chapter," he said, his voice filled with conviction. I took his hand, standing beside him, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like we were standing on solid ground. The battle for his daughter's future had been won, but there was still so much to fight for. The real journey, the one that mattered, had only just begun. And as we stood there, side by side, I realized that the future was no longer a question mark. It was a promise, one that we would keep together, no matter where the road took us. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. A promise kept. In the weeks that followed, Maxwell's life began to take on a new rhythm. There was no sudden transformation, no magical moment where everything fell into place. But slowly, steadily, things changed. The house felt more like a home, filled with laughter, the sound of footsteps running through the halls, and the soft hum of life resuming in its simplest form. Maxwell, once a man defined by his work and his empire, had learned to shift his focus. It wasn't easy, and there were still days when the weight of his past would crash down on him. But he was present. For his daughter. For me. For a future he hadn't imagined but was now determined to create. It wasn't all smooth sailing. There were moments of doubt. Moments when Maxwell questioned himself. Moments when the past threatened to overshadow everything he had worked so hard for. There were also moments of joy, small victories that made all the struggle worth it. Watching him bond with his daughter, watching him be the father she deserved, was nothing short of incredible. And through it all, I was there. I had come into this world thinking I was just a helper, an outsider, but now it felt like I had become a part of their family. Maxwell had opened his heart in ways I hadn't expected, and I had too. We were learning together how to navigate this new reality, one where love, rather than power or wealth, was the anchor. One evening, after a particularly long day of managing both his company and his fatherly responsibilities, Maxwell and I sat on the patio, a blanket draped over our shoulders as we watched the stars appear in the sky. The cool night air surrounded us, and for once, it felt as though we were simply two people, no longer bound by the expectations of who we should be, but free to be who we were. "You know, I always thought I knew what mattered," Maxwell said quietly, his voice barely audible over the sounds of the evening. "I always thought it was the next deal, the next big thing. But now, Now I realize how little all that actually means. I've spent so much time chasing something that didn't even make me happy. But her... He paused, his voice softening. She makes everything make sense. I smiled at his words, knowing just how far he had come. You're a good father, Maxwell. A better one than you realize. He looked at me then, his eyes filled with something deeper than I had ever seen before: gratitude, understanding, and maybe even something more. I wouldn't be here without you. You've helped me find that part of myself that I thought was lost. His words settled in the air, heavy with meaning. We had come a long way, and we both knew that there was still so much left to face. The future wasn't a clear path, it was still uncertain, filled with challenges and unexpected turns. But for the first time in a long while, it didn't seem as daunting. We had each other. There were still things left unsaid, emotions that needed time to fully unfold. But I knew that Maxwell and I had built something real, something that went beyond the confines of what either of us had expected when this journey started. We had found something more important than success or wealth. We had found the strength to rebuild and to be vulnerable together. A few days later, as we were both getting ready for another round of meetings and plans, Maxwell walked into the kitchen, his daughter in his arms. She giggled as he playfully tickled her, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Maxwell's focus wasn't on his next big decision, but on the little girl who was now his entire world. I know I'm not perfect, he said, glancing at me with a half smile, but I'm trying, every day. I walked over to him, reaching out to gently squeeze his shoulder. You don't have to be perfect, Maxwell. You're doing everything right, and she knows that. Maxwell nodded, a quiet understanding passing between us. We didn't need to talk about the struggles anymore, the weight of the past that had once defined him. We were both learning how to move forward, to embrace the future, knowing that it would be messy and imperfect, but full of possibilities. As Maxwell held his daughter and looked at me, I realized that we had built something beautiful out of the broken pieces of our lives. The future was still uncertain, but now it was something we could shape together. And as the days passed, I could feel the promise of something new taking root. A promise that no matter what challenges we faced, we would face them together. The battles, the moments of doubt, the struggles, they were all part of the journey. But what mattered most was that we were learning how to live, how to love, and how to be a family. There was still work to be done, lessons to be learned, but I knew, with certainty, that we were on the right path. The future wasn't a place we had to fear, it was a place we could create, hand in hand, as we walked through life together. We had found each other, and in doing so, we had found the beginning of something we would build together. A family, a future, and a promise kept. The road ahead. As the months passed, Maxwell's life began to settle into a rhythm, one that felt more natural, less fraught with the tension of the past. His daughter, now growing more and more each day, brought with her an energy that breathed life into every corner of the house. Maxwell, once a man consumed by deadlines and deals, found himself in a new role, one that wasn't defined by stock prices or press conferences, but by the soft, quiet moments of fatherhood. But the road ahead was never going to be easy. The scars of his past, those mistakes and regrets, hadn't just disappeared because of a courtroom victory. There were still battles to face, both internal and external. His company still demanded his attention, and the weight of maintaining it was never far from his mind. But every time he looked at his daughter, every time he held her in his arms, he knew there was something far more important than all of that. And for the first time, he was willing to make sacrifices for something greater than his empire. I watched him grow into this new role, not just as a father, but as a man willing to embrace his imperfections. He had started out as someone who thought he could control everything, someone who built walls around himself to keep the world out. But now, those walls were coming down. Maxwell had found something he had been searching for all along: peace, purpose, and the unshakable belief that family was the foundation upon which everything else could be built. And I too had changed. What began as an accidental involvement in Maxwell's world had grown into something far deeper than I had ever expected. In him, I saw a man who had once been afraid to feel, to let go of control, and now in his arms, his daughter, our daughter, was a living testament to how far he had come. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of doubt, days when the past crept in like a shadow, whispering that the journey wasn't over yet. But we had learned something crucial together. Love didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the pain, the mistakes, or the losses. But it gave us the strength to face those things, to learn from them, and to move forward. We were learning how to live with the weight of everything we had been through, but also how to let go of it. It was an ongoing process, one that would take time. But as we stood in the kitchen one evening, preparing dinner together with his daughter by his side, I realized that the future no longer seemed like something out of our control. It was ours to shape, ours to decide. You know, I used to think everything depended on what I could build, how big I could make my empire, Maxwell said one evening as he chopped vegetables, his daughter perched on the counter beside him. But now, I realize it was never about that. It was about what I could give her, what I could give both of you. His words hung in the air between us, simple but profound. Maxwell had spent so much of his life building things, businesses, relationships, successes. But now, he was learning that the most important thing he could build wasn't a company, it was a family. And in that family, there was space for all of us, space for mistakes, growth, love, and second chances. His daughter giggled, her small hands reaching for the flour as she tried to help, making a mess on the counter. Maxwell looked at her, his eyes softening. She doesn't care about my success or my failures. All she cares about is me being here, and that's the thing that matters most now. I couldn't help but smile at the scene in front of me. The kitchen was filled with the laughter of his daughter, the soft clink of utensils, and the quiet hum of life going on. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was a life we had built together, from the ashes of the past, and it was more than I could have ever imagined. We spent the evening together, cooking, talking, and simply enjoying the quiet moments that were now our reality. Maxwell's daughter had a way of making everything seem simpler, lighter, as though the weight of the world could be put aside for just a while. And for that, we were both grateful. Later that night, as I sat on the couch, Maxwell joined me, his daughter asleep in her room. The quiet of the house felt comforting, the peaceful silence a stark contrast to the chaos we had endured. Maxwell sat beside me, his hand resting gently on mine. I have spent so much time trying to fix everything, he said, his voice soft but filled with reflection. But what I've learned is that I don't need to fix everything. I just need to be present, for her, for you, for us. I turned to face him, our eyes meeting in the dim light of the room. You've already done it, I whispered. You've already built what matters. Maxwell smiled, the weight of his words sinking in. There was so much ahead, so much to figure out. But for the first time, I realized that the foundation we had laid was strong. We were in this together, and that was enough. Tomorrow would come with its own set of challenges, but we were ready. We had come so far, and we were no longer afraid of the future. Together, we could face whatever came next. And as I sat next to him, his hand resting in mine, I knew that the journey wasn't over. It had just begun. A future forged together. In the weeks that followed, Maxwell's new life slowly unfolded in ways that felt both natural and extraordinary. The quiet moments that once felt so foreign to him had become a part of the daily rhythm. The mansion no longer felt like a cold, empty space filled with memories of success and loneliness. It was now filled with laughter, the patter of little feet, and the soft hum of family life. Maxwell had found the balance he never thought possible, a balance between his world of power and his world of love. Maxwell's daughter, growing by the day, brought with her a sense of joy that none of us had anticipated. There were days when her innocent laughter was the only thing that made sense in a world that had once been ruled by ambition. Maxwell would often look at her with a softness I had never seen. His eyes filled with wonder, as if realizing for the first time that he had the most precious gift of all, the ability to shape her future, to show her the love that had been so absent from his own childhood. I, too, had found a new place in this life. What began as helping a man fight for his daughter had slowly turned into something deeper. I wasn't just there as a caretaker or a support system, I was becoming a part of something far greater. A family, a unit. The family that Maxwell had always wanted but had never known how to create. In the evenings, after Maxwell had finished his work and his daughter had gone to bed, we would sit together, just the two of us, on the patio, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The stillness of those moments held more than just silence. They were moments where we could reflect, where we could look back on everything we had been through and feel the quiet understanding between us. There was no need for words sometimes, just the shared weight of everything we had overcome was enough. One night, as we sat in the growing darkness, Maxwell turned to me, his face more serious than usual. The years of fighting and climbing to the top had made him guarded, but now there was a new vulnerability in him, a vulnerability I had witnessed over the past months. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice steady but filled with thought. "I never realized what I was missing. I never understood that it wasn't about the empire I built. It wasn't about the power or the control. It was about connection, about love, about having someone to share the journey with." His words struck me in a way I hadn't anticipated. It was the first time he had truly said it out loud. All those years of ambition and striving for something bigger had never led him to true fulfillment. It had taken the love of his daughter and me in a way to make him realize that true success wasn't found in boardrooms or financial reports. It was found in the people you loved and the relationships you built. "You've done more than you realize, Maxwell," I said softly, reaching out to place my hand on his. "You've built something real, something that lasts." He smiled, a quiet, genuine smile that I hadn't seen in a long time. "Maybe, but I know that it's you and her that have given me the chance to see what matters. I don't think I would have been able to see it without both of you." The air between us was thick with unspoken emotions, but there was no need for grand gestures or dramatic confessions. We had both learned something over the past months, something that no amount of success or failure could teach us. It was the importance of being present, the importance of love, and the importance of showing up when it matters most. As the evening wore on, we continued to sit in the quiet, knowing that we had reached a turning point in our lives. The future was still unknown, still filled with challenges and uncertainties, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't seem so daunting. It seemed like a future we could shape together, a future where love, rather than success or power, would guide us. "I've never thought about the future like this before," Maxwell said, his voice distant but hopeful. "But now, I want to make sure that she grows up knowing that no matter what happens, she has a place in the world, a place that's full of love, a place where she can find happiness and strength just like I've found." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything we had been through. It wasn't just about raising a child anymore. It was about creating a home, a real home where love and belonging were the foundation. We were both learning how to build that home, piece by piece. The sound of Maxwell's daughter calling out from upstairs broke the quiet, a reminder that our little family was waiting for us. Maxwell stood up, offering me a hand to help me to my feet. "We should go check on her," he said with a small chuckle. "She's probably trying to get into mischief again." I took his hand, a smile tugging at my lips. We walked inside together, side by side, as a family. And in that moment, I realized that everything we had gone through had led us to this point, this moment of quiet contentment, of love, and of understanding. We didn't know what the future would bring, but we knew one thing. Whatever it was, we would face it together, and that was more than enough. The journey of Maxwell and his daughter teaches us the importance of embracing vulnerability, and recognizing that success isn't solely defined by wealth or power, but by the relationships we nurture. Life isn't about perfection, but about growth, love, and the courage to show up for those who matter. True strength lies not in control, but in the willingness to let go of the past, face your fears, and commit to building a future rooted in love and connection. This is especially meaningful for adults balancing careers, personal growth, and relationships. It's a reminder that material success can never replace the value of being present for loved ones, the power of vulnerability in relationships, and the importance of investing in what truly matters: family and meaningful connections. When life feels overwhelming or uncertain, remembering that love and personal growth are the ultimate foundations can guide us toward more fulfilling lives, no matter the challenges we face. In the end, Maxwell's journey wasn't defined by his wealth or power, but by the courage to face his past and build a future that was meaningful. Through all the highs and lows, the struggles and victories, he found something that mattered more than anything: family. His daughter was no longer just a part of his life. She was the heartbeat of it. And as for Maxwell, he realized that no amount of money or success could replace the quiet joy of being there for someone who truly needed him. In the end, it wasn't about having everything, it was about giving everything to those who mattered most. Sometimes we all need a reminder that it's never too late to change, to build something real, to let go of the past, and to embrace the present. Maxwell's story teaches us that even in the most uncertain times, there is always hope, always a chance to rebuild, and always love waiting for us if we're brave enough to seek it. So, take a moment, reflect on what truly matters to you. You never know how your own story could unfold. And if you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, subscribe to Stories TH, and share where you're watching from. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Now take a deep breath and let the quiet settle. Your own adventure might be waiting right around the corner.